Hello, I'm Jared Goyette, and welcome to Wrap Up Weekly, where we report on the most important news and happening over the past week. Last week was rough for Moscow. There's no other way to spin it. Russian officials tried to keep up appearances, but the cracks showed, especially at the latest Ukraine-Russia talks in Istanbul. Compare this round to the opening in May. Back then, the Russian delegation strutted in, blocked the US observers, had the Turkish hosts escorted out, and laid down ultimatums. This time, the mood flipped. No bravado, just down faces and downcast eyes. What happened in the lead-in to drain their mojo? Here's the timeline. An SBU drone raid on Russia's strategic air fleet swept across 6 regions. Launched from truck beds, the drone struck bombers parked on runways. The scale of the destruction was so bad that it took an entire week to calculate how many aircraft were hit. But the final tally is stark. Roughly 40 aircraft wrecked or crippled, Tu-22s, Tu-95s, and at least one A-50 radar plane. NATO estimates that that's about a third of Russia's missile-carrying fleet. For the Kremlin, that's a major loss.
By far the most significant attack that Ukraine has mounted to date against Russia's long-range strike forces. The long-range aviation force, as part of the Russian aerospace forces, so their bomber fleet, is extremely heavily tasked against Ukrainian targets with large salvos of air-launched cruise missiles, and has been so literally throughout the entire war. They're also one leg of Russia's nuclear deterrent. The air-launched cruise missile leg with what we would term AS-23 or KH-102 nuclear missiles, or KH-101 conventional cruise missiles. Of the fleet is around 60 to 65 Tu-95s thought to have been active prior to this strike. So at least 8 destroyed, and potentially significantly more than that will be a significant chunk of the fleet's available assets.
Moscow finally weighed in on the drone strike, sort of. A week after the hits, Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov told state media that no aircraft were destroyed, just damage. I suggest you enjoy the satellite images of what he thinks the undestroyed planes look like. Important to note, these images were taken at different airfields. Either the Russians are going to restore their aviation from the ashes, or someone is lying again. Shocking, right? The troubles of the Tupolev firm, which services damaged and destroyed aircraft, did not end there. The Security Service of Ukraine hacked the servers of the production facility, obtaining critical data.
Now there is practically nothing secret left in the activities of the Tupolev Design Bureau for Ukrainian intelligence. In particular, we have acquired comprehensive information about individuals directly involved in servicing Russian strategic aviation. The result will obviously be noticeable both on the ground and in the sky. Ukrainian news agency Ukrinform, with reference to its own sources in the SBU.
You'd think the week couldn't get any worse for Moscow, but the SBU upped the ante. Their new target, the Kerch Bridge, Putin's pride project. Ukrainian teams set off more than a ton of explosives against the bridge's piers, leaving the supports mangled and the span in what Kyiv called critical condition. Moscow's line? Minor damage. Everything's fine. Sure. Hard to see how they inspected underwater pillars in just a few hours, but that's the story they're sticking to.
It is extremely important to understand that the explosion was carried out at the bottom, at a depth of about 10 meters. Therefore, there is no fire show, as in previous times. Also, the real condition of the support can be assessed after this only during diving work. Moreover, this also means the corresponding complexity of any repair work, the Defense Express edition reports.
Russia's answer to losing its showpieces? The usual. Hit peaceful cities. From Thursday night into Friday morning, the Kremlin threw nearly everything short of nukes at Ukraine. 407 attack drones, 6 ballistic missiles, and 38 cruise missiles in a span of hours. Russian commanders bragged that they were striking R&D centers and air bases. Reality looked different. Kyiv, Lutsk, Ternopil, Chernihiv, and Kharkiv all took hits. Most of the drones and missiles were knocked down, but not all. Fires collapsed buildings, more than 50 wounded and 6 dead, while others are still missing. And that was only one night. Shelling kept up all week. In Sumy, a Russian salvo struck the city center, cluster munitions, according to local officials. A medical clinic, cars, and homes were shredded, 4 killed, 24 injured. Thursday, Kharkiv got hit by Shaheeds. 2 apartment blocks in separate districts took direct strikes, 17 wounded, facades and parked cars torn open, no factories, no military sites, just neighborhoods, exactly like in Sumy.
This is another massive attack by terrorists, Russian terrorists who kill our people every night. This is another reason to impose maximum sanctions and put pressure on the Russian Federation together. We expect action from the US, Europe, everyone in the world who can help change these terrible circumstances. Power is of great importance, and the end of the war can only happen through power. We must put pressure on Moscow with all available tools and step by step deprive it of the opportunity to continue this aggression. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, on Telegram.
And the peace talks still stuck because of Moscow. Zelensky floated a simple offer: pause the fighting until a face-to-face meeting with Putin. Kyiv can meet any day, he said, or anywhere. Istanbul, the Vatican, Switzerland, take your pick. If the summit happens and yields nothing, the ceasefire ends the same day. Will it happen? Hard to see, given the Kremlin keeps declaring and showing its lack of interest in peace. My colleagues dig into that issue next.
Kyiv and Moscow have agreed to a new round of negotiations, and Ankara is once again ready to host the talks, according to Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan. An official date for the meeting is expected to be announced soon.
This is no longer just a war between two countries. Many other states are now involved, supporting one side or the other. The conflict is taking on a global dimension. We are expecting the next round of talks. Both sides see value in dialogue and are seeking to narrow the gap between them. Hakan Fidan, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Turkey, from Anadolu Agency.
So far, official Kyiv has not confirmed the upcoming negotiations. Meanwhile, Moscow has laid out its own preconditions for starting a third round. Russia's State Duma has demanded that Ukraine stop targeting railway bridges and long-range Air Force bases and agree to short-term ceasefires on certain parts of the front line.
So far, there is no real ceasefire. They're willing to pause for 2 or 3 days to collect their dead from the battlefield. I think they're idiots. A ceasefire is meant to prevent more deaths, not just to clean up after them. For them, it's just a short break in the war. That's why we really hope our American partners will push the sanctions package through the Senate and pressure Russia into a real ceasefire.
Along with these demands, the State Duma's Foreign Affairs Committee also floated possible dates for the talks, likely the end of June. At the same time, Putin's press secretary Dmitry Peskov stated that a third meeting between the Ukrainian and Russian delegations in Istanbul would happen only after both sides review the memorandums exchanged during the second round. But the exact date of the talks isn't the main issue. Despite all their statements, Russian authorities do not intend to use these meetings as a step toward ending the war, and they are openly admitting it.
At this stage, achieving peace is not the goal. The negotiation process began only because our American partners invited us. They believed the war was happening because we weren't talking. Russia won't accept Kyiv's memorandum, and Kyiv rejects Moscow's version. Europe will side with Kyiv. Trump will say it's all because he's not involved. But we won't shut down the talks. We'll keep negotiating and keep fighting. A source close to the Russian Foreign Ministry, in an anonymous comment to Verstka,
Kremlin officials are now publicly acknowledging that Russia is aiming for the total destruction of Ukraine, a clear indication that Moscow has no interest in fair peace talks or a diplomatic resolution. According to the US-based Institute for the Study of War, analysts highlighted a statement from Russian Security Council Deputy Chair Dmitry Medvedev, who said outright that the purpose of Russia's participation in Istanbul meetings was to ensure its victory, not to reach peace.
Russian state media has previously cautioned the Russian public against expecting any significant results from ongoing Ukrainian-Russian negotiations. Although Russian officials continue to falsely project interest in good faith peace negotiations to US and Western officials. But Russian officials have yet to demonstrate a willingness to compromise on any of their long-standing demands to bring about peace in Ukraine. Russia remains committed to pursuing demands that amount to nothing short of Ukraine's full capitulation. From a report by the Institute for the Study of War.
The first round of peace talks in Turkey took place on May 16th, initiated by Putin. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had stated he would personally await the Russian dictator in Istanbul, but Putin didn't show up. He sent a delegation instead, which Zelensky dismissed as purely symbolic. The meeting brought no closer end to the war or even a ceasefire. The only tangible outcome was a prisoner exchange, 1,000 for 1,000. A total of 880 Ukrainian defenders and 120 civilians were released from Russian prisons and camps. The second round was held on June 2nd, again in Istanbul. Both delegations exchanged memorandums outlining diplomatic principles and possible terms for a ceasefire. Ukraine again raised humanitarian concerns, demanding the return of several hundred children deported by Russia. On prisoners of war, Kyiv proposed a major exchange to repatriate the severely wounded and all military personnel under 25 under the all-for-all formula. Both sides also agreed to return the bodies of 6,000 fallen soldiers. Reported by Valeria Nikopolova, UATV News.
Allies are pushing back after the latest Russian strikes. At the Ramstein defense minister meeting, new aid packages rolled out. Britain leads the way, more than $350 million for 100,000 drones, another £225 million to train Ukrainian troops. And that's just the first wave. More pledges are coming.
Putin has talked about peace, but shown he's unwilling to negotiate. And so more pressure must be brought on Moscow to come to the negotiating table, to negotiate seriously, because Ukraine has demonstrated it stands willing for peace. US is trying to lead those negotiations, and we as nations supporting Ukraine will do everything we can to help that process.
Germany is stepping up too. The Bundestag has signed off on €5 billion in new support. What's in the package? Funding to build long-range weapons inside Ukraine, additional air defense systems, more guns and ammunition. Exact specs are sealed. Chancellor Friedrich Merz classified the details so as to not disclose sensitive military information.
But Russia will fail, because brave Ukrainians are defending their country and their freedom, confronting the Russian aggressor with great resolve. And because we are supporting Ukraine in its defense with weapons, ammunition, training, with everything it needs, and for as long as it needs. We will continue to expand this support, and we will maintain it for the long term. This is what the coalition stands for. Russia would be mistaken to believe otherwise.
More pledges rolled in. The Netherlands is sending a minesweeper, the frigate Corel, plus naval drones. Belgium just tacked on another €1 billion, money that runs through 2029. Norway is in for $700 million, all earmarked for drones. The bigger picture? This Ramstein wasn't just about shipments. It was about setting up joint Ukrainian-European defense companies for the long haul.
Our partners are ready to move ahead. This is a win-win for everyone. Ukrainian companies can invest in Europe, and European companies or Euro-Atlantic companies can build their factories in Ukraine. Ukrainian companies, of course, will gain access to financing, advanced technologies, and new production sites, and strategic partnerships with leading global players. Our allies will have the opportunity to build their industrial strengths, but with all weapons supplied to Ukraine. Together, we are not only defending freedom, we are shaping the future of Ramstein defense.
Beating Moscow takes more than weapons. The sanction screws have to keep turning. According to the New York Post, U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson says he's on board with a bipartisan Senate bill, the one originally introduced in April, that would crank up the pressure if peace talks fail. What's inside? New penalties on Russia and a 500% tariff on imports from any country that buys Russian oil, gas, or uranium. It's a bipartisan push, ready for a vote the moment President Trump gives the signal.
There's a high level of interest here in the Senate on both sides of the aisle and moving on it, and it very well could be something that we would take up in this work period. Obviously, we're working with the White House to try and ensure that What we do and when we do it works well with the negotiations that they've got underway. John Thune, Senate Majority Leader, Republican Party, in a comment for journalists.
More sanctions are on the table. The German foreign minister in Washington this week said Putin should get ready. He met with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Ukraine dominated the agenda. Both agreed the next step is to tighten the screws on Moscow if the war keeps grinding on. Nikita Sobikov takes it from here.
Germany and the United States share a unified stance on the urgent need for a ceasefire, stated German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul after meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio in Washington. Wadephul stressed that Kyiv is ready for negotiations, but the Kremlin under Putin is not. The Kremlin dictator must agree to a ceasefire, he said. To achieve this, both sides agreed to coordinate their actions. If Putin continues to refuse negotiations, both Europe and the U.S. are ready to act, Wadephul assured.
We have a common position on Ukraine. Here in the U.S., over 80 senators are ready to consider and adopt a sanctions bill in Congress. That's not in the hands of my conversation partner today, but in the hands of the Senate. However, he, like me, believes that if Putin maintains his obstructive stance, action will be taken.
The EU is already working on its 18th package of sanctions against Russia. Previously, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced that the new restrictions would target both lines of the Russian Nord Stream gas pipeline. This move has full support from the German government. At a joint press conference with the President of Ukraine in Berlin, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz pledged to do everything to ensure the Russian pipeline never becomes operational. According to Merz, Brussels is coordinating its efforts to increase sanctions pressure on the aggressor state in tandem with Washington.
Work is already underway on an 18th sanctions package. We are holding talks with the United States on this. You know that the U.S. government and the U.S. Congress are in intensive dialogue with each other about further sanctions from the United States. We are accompanying these talks, which are also being conducted intensively with my involvement.
According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, the real impact of Western sanctions will be felt by the Russian Federation by the summer of 2026. However, the Ukrainian leader believes this process can be accelerated.
June 2026. We all hope the war will be over by then, truly. But we also understand that Russians will start to feel the economic impact of sanctions, even those already in place, and we believe that from that point, around summer 2026, their economy will feel it strongly. We understand the budget deficit they'll face. Maybe it won't be catastrophic because most of their economy is in the shadows. It's hard to analyze what's in the dark and how much they've got in reserves. I don't think we all know the full details, but it will hit. Volodymyr Zelensky, president of Ukraine, during a meeting with journalists.
Commenting on the upcoming 18th EU sanctions package, the Ukrainian head of state noted it could include significant decisions. Experts suggest that Russia's energy sector, Kremlin's main source of income and the key financial resource for its war against Ukraine, could be a primary target. The EU is also considering additional sanctions against around 20 Russian banks and new trade restrictions. The direct goal of these measures is to cut Kremlin revenue and block the aggressor state's access to technologies critical for weapons production.
Most likely, the 18th package will include tough energy sanctions, possibly even an embargo on liquefied natural gas. We'll also probably see tighter controls and the disconnection of several Russian banks from the SWIFT system.
The European Commission is proposing to hit Kremlin revenues from oil exports by lowering the price cap on Russian fuel from $60 to $45 per barrel, according to the Financial Times. The initiative has already been backed by France, Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom. Ukraine, however, is pushing for even bolder measures. At an EU Foreign Affairs Council meeting, Ukrainian Deputy Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha proposed that G7 nations cut the price cap on Russian oil in half to $30 per barrel. Reported by Nikita Skoblikov, UATV News.
Russia risks being left without a financial cushion in 2026. The ongoing Russian aggression against Ukraine, as well as Western sanctions, have already brought the Federation's economy to degradation. The bulk of the country's financial resources have been spent on supplying the military-industrial complex for the fourth year, and this has led to a reduction in the liquid part of the National Welfare Fund by almost 4 times. Yulia Grasunova will continue this topic.
Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the liquid portion of the country's National Wealth Fund, a key stabilization tool for the Kremlin, has decreased nearly 4-fold. In 2022, the liquid portion of the NWF reached $145 billion. But as of May 1st, 2025, the reserve stands at only $39 billion.
The main source of revenue for the National Wealth Fund oil exports remains under pressure. Western sanctions have limited Russia's access to traditional markets, while alternative logistical channels demonstrate lower efficiency and higher costs. It is projected that in 2025, the average price of Brent crude oil will be $64 per barrel, and in 2026, $60. For Russia, whose budget relies on oil and gas revenues, such dynamics create critical fiscal risks, reported by analysts of Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service on the agency's website.
In Moscow, they are trying to publicly demonstrate apparent economic stability. However, in reality, Russia's economy is in a state of degradation. Problems have affected nearly every sector of the economy. For example, state-owned Rosatom's projects for 2025 are underfunded by 80%, and declines in transportation volumes are recorded even in strategic industries, mining, metallurgy, and construction. Large companies have suspended dividend payments.
Since late last year, a sharp decline has been observed in the Russian economy. According to the high-frequency index compiled by Goldman Sachs, annual GDP growth rates have fallen from approximately 5% to 0. Similar trends are noted by VEB, Russia's development bank. Sberbank's business activity indicator also shows a downturn from the publication in The Economist.
Massive injections of funds into the military-industrial complex, falling oil prices due to Western sanctions, inflation exceeding 10%, and an increase in the key interest rate to a record 21% have led to a rapid decline in the standard of living in Russia.
This all reminds me of the late 80s, early 90s, the default of 98, when even the broadly patriotically minded public begins to acknowledge that there are major questions about the economy. That's a very bad sign. It's like during the 98 default. First, there was denial. Other indicators too. For instance, freight loading on the Russian railways network has decreased by almost 9%.
Taking out loans is impossible. There's nothing to pay off mortgages with. Food prices are rising, production is shrinking, and there's a shortage of qualified personnel. These are the realities of today's Russia. Pressure is being exerted on the chairman of Russia's central bank, Elvira Nabiullina, within the government, according to Bloomberg. She is being urged to lower the key interest rate by June 6th. According to experts, the current state of affairs in the country may force Putin to halt the summer offensive campaign.
In August-September, they will discuss the budget for the next year. And here, they'll face a very tough time. This will be the moment when it becomes clear that they won't be able to sustain and increase military spending like this starting January 1st, 2026. All they can do is find money to cover this year's deficit and then scrape by for a few more months.
Moreover, Western partners of Kyiv intend to compel the Kremlin to engage in peace negotiations with Ukraine. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham stated that new sanctions against Russia must be introduced before the G7 summit in June, according to Bloomberg. Graham noted that the bill already has 82 co-sponsors, and he is coordinating work on the document with the White House. The bill, as a reminder, provides for the introduction of 500% tariffs on imports from countries that purchase, in particular, Russian petroleum products and uranium, reported by Yulia Hranovska, UATV News.
Well, that's it for us this week on Weekly Wrap-Up for UATV. I've been your host, Jared Goyette. Stick with me, and maybe next week I'll have a jacket. Thank you for watching, and we hope you've learned something new and maybe informative.